All right, what's up, everybody? It is 4:30 on a Tuesday. We are back for the weekly live stream, and this week I am joined by first-time guest and longtime friend in the fantasy space, Matt Lawson. Matt, how are you, sir?
Zach, I'm thrilled to be here. Even though we're coming off this week, Fantasy Santa Claus leaving us a huge lump of coal with LeBron James and LaMelo Ball both going down right at the beginning of many people's fantasy playoffs. It's devastating, but we're here to help.
Yeah, that was LeBron ended up playing through that injury and then came out yesterday that, man, he's going to miss multiple weeks. So, yeah, a lot of teams taking big hits, and of course LaMelo Ball has been often injured this season. And I'm sure you saw the play yesterday. Those non-contact injuries can be the worst, right? I mean, he was just trying to I forget who was defending him. He was trying to cross up there at the 3-point line and just fell back, and that's all she wrote.
I think this is really the dark side of the discussion we've been having about load management and rest games, because both LeBron and LaMelo were playing on compromised feet, ankles that have been injured throughout this entire season. We know LaMelo had that ankle sprain to start the year, had a recurrence of that ankle sprain within a couple of weeks of coming back into action, and I don't think it ever fully healed. I mean, and the reality for these guys, even if it's not on the same leg, they end up playing in a somewhat compromised way, trying to push through it, trying to play in as many games as possible. We know LeBron was doing that to try to push the Lakers, from the play-in into maybe playoffs. That kind of push is exactly the kind of thing we're telling players we want them to do. And then this is the dark side of it, that you end up going down with injuries that keep you out for weeks or the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Load management is, that's probably the hottest topic in just the world of NBA in general, but certainly for fantasy managers who are, missing guys in and out of the lineup. So, Matt, let's go ahead and dive into this. I'm sure everybody that's tuning in knows Matt as, the Dynasty GOAT, as many people call him on Twitter. He is one of the founders of Fantasy Basketball International. Please make sure you check him out over there. And Matt will give us a good plug here at the end of the show. So hopefully we get some good Dynasty questions. Let's go ahead and roll right into this. All right. What's good, Zach? I was offered Vassell for my James Wiseman in a multi-cat Dynasty league. So, Matt, I'll toss this one over to you right now. What are you doing with this offer?
I'm smashing accept on this. I think that this is going to be a great moment. If you've been holding James Wiseman this long, you're going to see some big stat lines in Detroit, and these are exactly the kind of offers that you need to pounce on. Vassell has been out. People are forgetting already how good he had been the entire season. He's going to be a piece of the Spurs core going forward. There's no doubt about that. Regardless of what happens for them in the lottery, Devin Vassell is a scalable player who can fit into any winning lineup in the NBA. And this is exactly the kind of trade that you want to make to be able to get off of that investment that you made in James Wiseman. You've probably been holding him since you took him too high in the 2020 rookie draft. Believe me, if the Warriors could have made a move like this, they would have gotten off James Wiseman a lot earlier. Yeah. So this is exactly the kind of move that you want to make, especially in a categories league where, while Wiseman can get a lot of points, get some rebounds like we saw last night, there were no defensive stats. He's not a particularly good free throw shooter. You're not going to be able to have that 9-category upside that you're looking for that you can get with the Devin Vassell. So this is an automatic accept for me, and exactly the kind of move that anyone who has Wiseman should be looking to make during this stretch where he's going to get a lot of extra run with the Pistons.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think this is probably a good sell high opportunity for Wiseman. 23 points last night, I think 7 rebounds, and so he's a good pickup for the rest of the season. For if you're in a redraft league, he's definitely good in a points league, obviously. But yeah, these are a lot of empty calorie stat lines, as you mentioned. No defensive stats. He does attempt threes, so the field goal percentage isn't going to be as high as somebody like a Mitchell Robinson or a Rudy Gobert. So yeah, I'm totally with you here. This is an automatic accept. All right. What's up, Zach? Hey, Daniel. Thanks for dropping in, man. Can you talk Dennis Smith Jr. upside with LaMelo done for the season? Would you drop Clarkson to grab DSJ in a 9-cat 10-team league? So, Matt, we talked about it right before the show started. LaMelo Ball sustained a fracture in the right ankle. Going to miss some time. What do we think about Dennis Smith Jr. compared to Jordan Clarkson? Is this a move that you're going to make, or are you going to hold tight with Clarkson?
So both of these guys are kind of on that top 100 fringe for the rest of the season, in my perspective. And in a 10-team league, that's right around the end of your roster. And if you have a good team, they're probably back end of it. So this is really a categories and need-based question. I think with Clarkson, you're going to be obviously getting a lot of points and threes, some assist contributions. With Dennis Smith Jr., even a little bit stronger assists and big steal numbers. So if you're a team that needs those additional steals, if that's an area that would really put you over the top, I can definitely see Dennis Smith Jr. being a strong add here. But both of those guys are right around that top 100 area. Really comes down to what kind of fantasy stat set your team needs and how you're built for your fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for all of these questions, context always matters. I think that's something we hit every week in the show, and something a lot of fantasy guys will talk about. I will add the caveat that Kelly Oubre just recently returned, so maybe some of those extra minutes that Dennis Smith Jr. might be soaking up might go to Oubre as he works his way back into game shape and works his way back into some more minutes in the rotation. But yeah, I think either of these guys is totally fine, just depending on your team need. All right, Arthur, what's up, man? Is there any chance Middleton plays both back-to-backs this week? So for anybody that hasn't checked the schedule out, Milwaukee plays a unique games this week. It's Tuesday and Wednesday back-to-back, and then a Saturday, Sunday back-to-back. So I'll toss this one to you, Matt. Do we think that Middleton is going to play all 4 games this week, or are you automatically just saying, hey, 1 or 2 of these games he's going to be out?
I'd be stunned if he plays more than 3 games, and I think it's most likely going to be 2. He's on a minutes restriction right now, and we saw last year in the playoffs how vitally important Chris Middleton's health was to the Bucks. I mean, I think they win that series against Boston if Middleton's healthy.
Yeah.
They played without him and still had a tight series. And that's entirely the matchup that the Bucks are focused on, of being able to beat the Celtics this year, likely in the Eastern Conference Finals. I can't see them attempting to compromise that. As much as it hurts us as fantasy managers to try to push him out there for extra games in the middle of March, it's not really going to matter. So he's going to end up probably sitting both of those on the back-to-back. Maybe we start to see those minutes creep back up. Maybe we start to see him reaching back up into the mid to upper 20s in minutes. I think he eventually caps out maybe around 30 minutes a night later in the regular season. But this week, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure that he plays, as you mentioned, more than 3 games. It may only end up being 2 games. All right. Moving on here. 14-team, 9 category. Playoffs are next week. I need a center. Which of these do you recommend? Kleba, Jackson Hayes, JRE, or Ijax? I'm inclined to say none of the above, but I'm assuming that's not an option. So which of this bunch are you eyeing, Matt? Does anybody catch your eye here out of this lackluster group?
This is tough. I mean, Isaiah Jackson has just been a walking DNP CD for weeks now. You can't trust him as much as I love him. And I'd love it if he could somehow get minutes. And it's going to take someone kidnapping Daniel Tice, Jalen Smith, like just getting rid of every single available center. And even then, I bet Andrew Nemhard would probably start at center for the Pacers because Rick Carlisle just doesn't want to play Isaiah Jackson. So that one's kind of off the table. We did see a little bit more Jackson Hayes last night, but there is no interest from the Pelicans in prioritizing his minutes. I think he could easily see him not really being a factor for the rest of the fantasy regular season and playoffs. And then on top of that, Kleber's just coming back from injury. Robinson Earl is probably the guy most likely to just play some minutes if you absolutely need someone who's going to be out there. Although OKC's big man rotation is always in flux, and it's going to be even more so if we're going to continue to see them rest Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in an attempt to be able to attract more lottery balls.
Yeah, I have to agree with you here. Robinson Earl is probably going to see some minutes compared to these other guys. But yeah, I really can't. I wouldn't be counting on any of these guys to provide you with any sort of decent minutes this week, or next week, I should say. All right. Moving on, added Bagley and Dunn. With his 10-day contract, he's playing good enough to get extended. Is he worth a hold for the playoffs, or should I keep Naughty Nicky now that Melo is out? I need room for a KPJ return. So Chris Dunn has been playing very well for Utah recently. Don't know how long that can continue. Marvin Bagley, obviously the last 2 games, 21 points in each of those, 18 rebounds in the first game, 12 last night, I believe it was 12. So what are we doing here? Obviously, we're going to drop one of these guys for KPJ. For me, I think this is probably dependent on your team. I'm not sure I can count on Chris Dunn necessarily, especially with Colin Sexton maybe going to return. And Nick Richards, 9-9 with a block last night in just, I think, 18 minutes, if I remember right. So what are we doing here, man? I think this is based on team build. If you need the rebounds, if you need the blocks, I'll stay true with Nick. But for me, it's Chris Dunn that I'm dropping.
Yeah, we get into this situation every year once we get into February, March, April, where these 10-day contract players can kind of catch fire in a moment because the teams are just depleted or they're just simply not trying to win. Chris Dunn is a guy who, if you give him minutes, he's going to rack up some assists and steals. That's just who he is. But I would not trust that he's even going to get extended much beyond maybe a second 10-day contract. So for a fantasy playoff hold, I'm not holding him. He's a streamer for me. I mean, unless you're in the deepest of all leagues. If we're talking about a 12-team scenario, he's outside of that for me. And maybe I'm inserting him as a stream to be able to get some extra steals in a matchup if that's what I need. But I'm not depending on him going forward. With Bagley, that's also very situational. You've got Isaiah Stewart out right now, Jalen Duren. Bagley's going to get more minutes like he did last night if that's the scenario. But once, and I think it'll be pretty soon, you have both Duren and Stewart back in action, you could see each of those guys getting about 24 minutes a night, the splitting the power forward and centered minutes between them four ways. And then suddenly none of them has exceptional value for you. So you can ride the Bagley wave while Duren and Stewart are out. I think that's going to have a little bit more longevity than Dunn. And then when it comes to Nick Richards, he's just going to continue to roll in that solid backup role, probably getting around 18 minutes a night behind Mark Williams. And you know what the contributions are going to be. So like you said, that's very category and need dependent. If you need those big man stats, Nick Richards is going to be a pretty consistent source of them.
All right. Superman has joined the chat. Drop one of Danny, RJ, or Trey Murphy in a 12-team head-to-head 9-cat. I'm assuming this is RJ Barrett.
If so it's RJ Hampton, that's the drop.
Yeah, RJ Hampton. And honestly, if it's RJ Barrett, I think that's where I'm leaning. Do you see this a different way?
No, I mean, last night was kind of instructive. I mean, we saw Emmanuel Quickly playing over RJ a little bit, which for Tibbs to do that, I think says something. I mean, Tibbs has been extremely stubborn to not play Quickly, and Quickly's just been out playing Barrett. And right now he's a better basketball player than RJ Barrett, which I know is a strong statement. But Emmanuel Quickly has gotten a lot better this year. He continues to improve, and I think the Knicks need to win regardless of whether that hurts anybody's feelings. They're on a hard push to avoid being in the play-in and stay above that line. I think they will, and I think as long as Quickly is contributing to winning and contributing to winning basketball and in the favor of Tom Thibodeau, he's going to play and hurt the role for RJ Barrett. Trey Murphy is another question, though, because we're just seeing the Pelicans reducing the amount of interest they have in him, but he still has a better 9-category stat set than RJ. So unless you're in a very particular punt build where percentages and defensive stats aren't as important to you, then Barrett moves up in value a little bit. RJ just isn't a good 9-cat player. And if his minutes are going to drop, he's going to be basically unplayable in most standard leagues.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And as you mentioned, Quickly tied with Julius Randle for team lead in points last night. Tibbs continues to give him big minutes, nearly 30 minutes a night over the last month, which is huge for him to give a young guy that much trust. So that is a big endorsement for him, and he should continue to see plenty of run moving forward. So, yeah, obviously it's going to be RJ here from both of us. All right. What's up, guys? As an AD owner in Dynasty head-to-head 9-cat, I'm considering trading for Vanderbilt for some insurance. Do I offer Toby, Jaden McDaniels, Trey Murphy, or stay put and just pray AD stays healthy? I think you can do both. I think you're going to be praying regardless of what you do. Pray for that health. But in this case, yeah, I think trading for Vanderbilt is a great idea. I wouldn't be trading Toby, but I mean, would you trade Jaden McDaniels or Trey Murphy? Because I would trade Trey Murphy right now.
I think from a season-long perspective, that's definitely the answer. But there's a part of me that's thinking about future years that is looking at the age of Tobias Harris, the realities of what could happen for players who are not superstar tier, but not even really star tier, but kind of a little bit below. They hit the wall a little bit earlier than we would like. And Tobias, while not old, is getting to that line where decline and the end of his prime is happening. Now, if you are in a push to win this year, then yeah, you want to be able to hold on to Tobias Harris. I value Jaden McDaniels and Trey Murphy more in Dynasty because their primes are still to come. They are not there yet, and yet they are still solid fantasy contributors now. And I think there's upside for more. But it sounds like if you're worried about AD's health, you're worried about winning this year. So that would probably be moving Trey Murphy. And Vanderbilt is so young as well. I believe he's like the same age as Trey Murphy. So swapping out Murphy and Vanderbilt, that's a pretty easy 1-to-1. I'm fine with that if you're a contender looking to be able to maximize your chances to win the title this year.
All right. And again, context matters if you're going for the win this year, or are you building for the future? But as you mentioned, it sounds like he's trying to win right now. All right. Got some Kings interest here. Guys, is Kevin Herter or Malik Monk worth holding in a 12-team 9-cat? Yes. I mean, yes to both. Malik Monk, though, is obviously the hot name right now after dropping 45 the other night. So, yeah, both of them are worth holding. I think Monk right now is cooking.
Yeah, I mean, there's not going to be any major changes to the way that Sacramento is running their rotation going forward. They found a groove, they're winning with it, and they're trying to hold on into some of those top seeds within the Western Conference, with a lot of teams breathing behind their necks behind them. So I would expect more of the same kind of minutes in production with both Herter and Monk going forward, and both of those guys are giving you numbers that are in that range of 12-team relevance.
All right. Do you trust Kawhi to play games down the stretch, except for back-to-backs? Kawhi team just lost LaMelo, or do I just avoid? At this point, I'm not really sure how you avoid. I'm really sorry you lost LaMelo. That is a big-time bummer. But at this point, I'm not really sure what you do with Kawhi other than, again, just kind of pray at this point. But, yeah, I think we can expect him to play. He has been playing except for the back-to-backs. There really hasn't been any sort of major health scares with him recently. So at this point, yeah. Do you have any indications otherwise, Matt?
No, I mean, it's going to be more of the same with Kawhi. Don't expect him to play back-to-backs, but his value in individual games is so strong right now that in totals, he's still pushing into top 15 value, even in totals, because of how good he is on a per-game basis. Yeah. So that's where we need to recognize that in category leagues especially, the value of the elite players is in some places double or triple really good players that are still on your roster. So even if you're not getting that extra game from Kawhi in the fantasy playoffs, he's still better than guys who are getting a game or two more than him. Even top 50 players who are getting a game or two more than him when he's operating at this level. And we are seeing that peak prime Kawhi right now when he does play. So you ride it out. I mean, you're fortunate, as we've seen with LeBron or LaMelo, to be able to have him playing. As long as he's playing, you keep rolling him out there. You accept not playing him on back-to-backs, and you enjoy all the fantasy goodness in the games that he is out there for.
Absolutely. All right. Moving on. Who to drop in order to activate Fred VanVleet off of IL? DeLon Wright, Monty Morris, Danny G, or Trey Murphy? Matt, I'm just going to ask you this now. Can you defend Monty Morris to me? I feel like his name comes up in a lot of these questions, and I just don't understand why people continue to hold him. Is there a reason why you'd be holding Monty Morris outside of a deep league right now?
No, I mean, the problem is that Monty Morris had a little bit of preseason hype. I think his ADP got a little bit inflated because he was coming into, essentially staying in a starting role. He was a starting point guard last year for the Nuggets, but there was an idea that, he was going to be able to maybe expand a little bit in the Wizards offense. We haven't seen that happen. I don't see any reason why it's going to be changing down the stretch here. And it's just not an exciting fantasy contributor. You're getting mild assist contributions, and there's just not a whole lot else to be able to hold on to that's going to push you over the top in a categories league. So I'm out on Monty Morris as a rest of season contributor in standard leagues.
All right, so Monty, time to go. All right, dynasty outlook on Isaiah Stewart. For me, it's not super rosy. Maybe you have a different take on this one, but honestly, he doesn't give you very many defensive stats for a big man. He takes a lot of threes, which is something, he worked on in the offseason, made it a point. Hey, I'm starting to take threes. So the percentages are down, not a particularly good free throw shooter. He's essentially just a points and boards guy in the vein of Marvin Bagley, who's also on his team and also getting minutes. And don't forget about Jalen Duren. Maybe you've heard of him. He's looking dominant right now. I mean, what do you think about and they added James Wiseman. So what do you think about Isaiah Stewart? Not particularly appealing to me personally.
Well, what I always tell people is that in Dynasty, look to transactions to understand what teams actually think about players and what they see as their vision for the roster going forward. And what Troy Weaver has told us again and again is that he idealizes having two bigs in a lineup who can stay on the court defensively, be switchable, and be bigger than the other roster. He's made comments to be able to say that their roster has been too small, that they need to be able to get bigger like Cleveland has. And I think he's used that as a model to be able to say what he wants to be going forward. And that's why you're seeing some of these post-hype sleeper bigs being brought in like Marvin Bagley, like James Wiseman. The issue with both of them is that they're not going to bring anything defensively. If you could take Isaiah Stewart's defensive ability and put it into Marvin Bagley or James Wiseman, you'd have a pretty excellent player. The problem is that the Pistons don't really have that kind of all-around prospect in anyone other than Jalen Duren. So while Stewart has been a defensive anchor and his development to be able to at least be confident enough to shoot threes, even though they haven't really been going in the second half of the season, it's impressive, but I think ultimately we're seeing him settling into what is going to be a rotation role. Guy who plays minutes in around the mid-20s in his prime, is a good dependable defensive player off of the bench, really strong rebounder. And I think in limited minutes, you might see the block rate come back up. A lot of what he's doing is trying to be playing sound defense, not gambling for blocks, not taking the risk for them. And you saw his block rate be sky high early in his career, has nosedived a little bit since then. So maybe in the long-term outlook, we see the block rate come back a little bit. He becomes a better per minute player, even if the minutes dip down. But he's not a guy that I think he's a priority target, because the Pistons still have another lottery pick that's about to come in this offseason, and that could further cloud their front court situation, depending on who that is. I just don't know if long-term if Isaiah Stewart is going to be able to hold a role similar to what he had this season.
Do you think Stewart is one of those guys that is going to be a better on-court defender or a better on-court player than he is, things that actually show up in the box score and matter for fantasy managers?
Well, it's interesting because we've seen with a lot of big men that earlier in their careers, they have to adjust from chasing blocks and being out of position defensively to playing sound defense. And then all of a sudden they come around to the other side and the block rate comes back up. We've seen this with Mitchell Robinson. We've seen it to some degree with Jaren Jackson, where all of a sudden there's like this spike back up to a really impressive block rate. And I think that's possible with Stewart, but he's not a guy with the most vertical pop. He's a little bit more ground bound than those other guys. He's not as long as them. I think that he's more of a solid real life contributor than a fantasy player. And while there could be some improvement, I think in the long run, he's not a guy that you should be valuing as even a top 125 dynasty asset going forward. More of a guy that I value toward the top 150 range. And that could even change further with his outlook if the Pistons add more depth in the front court through the draft this year.
All right. Trade discussion here. Would you trade Marcus Smart for D'Lo for the playoff run? I'm in first, 9-cat, head-to-head, 12 team. So if you're in first, obviously you probably have a little bit of slack to give here. You don't need to have a guy that doesn't have injury concerns. Obviously, unless there's been a new update. Russell, the last I checked, was doubtful to play tonight. He's still dealing with injuries. But Russell is the better player, the better fantasy player of the two, I should say. This season. He has been for majority of the season, and with LeBron out, if D'Lo can get back and be healthy, he figures to see a pretty large role as the team's starting point guard, and without LeBron to take over some of those duties as facilitator, you got to think D'Lo goes out there and really has a great end of season if he's healthy. So if I'm in first place, I think I'm making this deal. Matt, what say you?
For me, this is close enough that I think it really comes down to what you need, what your build is. Because with Smart, you're going to be getting those big steal numbers. You're going to get strong
Yeah.
assists. That's really about it for what he brings to the table for fantasy.
Yeah.
When with D'Lo, I do expect the scoring to be really good. I mean, he's going to be an elite 3-point contributor down the stretch. Points should be really solid. I think he'd be scoring around 18, 19 a game per night, and you're probably you're still going to have strong assist contributions, especially as all the playmaking that LeBron brings to the table. There's a vacuum there that needs to be filled by somebody, and that's going to fall on Russell to a great degree. So it should be a really strong finish to him. If those, depending on what stat set is more agreeable to your build, I could definitely see a slight edge to Russell there, even in a vacuum. But both can be strong contributors depending on what you need.
All right. Moving on. Some more Lakers talk here. Schroeder, Beasley, or DSJ, 10-team, 9-cat head-to-head playoffs week 21 through 23. Just looking at this right off the bat, man, I'm going with Beasley because if D'Lo comes back, I think Schroeder's shine has a little bit taken away, and I think Beasley can still be a top 100 guy even when the rest of that Lakers roster is healthy. And, of course, LeBron is going to be out for a little while. So, for me, it's going to be Beasley.
I think Beasley's probably the most solid choice here, where you know exactly what you're going to be getting. He's going to be dependent on pretty heavily to continue to bomb threes, especially with LeBron out. A little bit of a scoring vacuum opened up on that roster. I think he's the smartest choice here. Dennis Smith Jr., like we talked about earlier, going to give you some assist and steals, but there could be, especially with Charlotte tanking down the stretch with nothing to play for, we could be getting a whole lot of Theo Maledon. We could be getting, Bryce McGowan's out there. We could be getting some guys off the Greensboro swarm that you've never even heard before that are going to be marching onto the court. It's going to get ugly. So anybody on the Hornets is a little bit of a liability in that regard. Although I don't think it matters who they play, they're still going to be losing. But the Lakers have a lot to play for. Beasley's going to play a lot of minutes, and you know exactly what you're going to get. And I would definitely not be touching Dennis Schroeder in this situation. That definitely not a choice for me there.
Absolutely. And yeah, as you mentioned, Charlotte, I think they've won 4 or 5 in a row, I believe. So, I mean, they've really got to start kicking it up here with the tanking, man. I'm not sure what they're doing.
They've played some pretty weak teams in that stretch, and I expect it to get pretty ugly.
Yeah.
LaMelo had been playing really well. I mean, that beating Minnesota, that was one of the best games that he played all year. It's a real shame that this is probably the end of his season.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Have the Thunder shut down? There's the S word that we did not want to see. Have they shut down SGA? No, Isaiah Joe has just outplayed him and has taken over his starting spot. So SGA is going to be coming off the bench now, and that's all she wrote. Now, Matt, what do we think here about SGA? They're taking a cautious approach, right? I mean, to me, they're not going to shut him down at this point. They want him to be healthy for the stretch run. The difference between the 6th and the 13th seed in the West, I think, is still just 2 or 3 games. Oklahoma City is firmly in that playoff hunt for what people thought was going to be a miracle if they could actually pull that off, and yet here they are. So I think SGA will come back. I'm not super concerned about that. Do you have a different take on that?
No, that's how I see it too. I mean, I think we're going to see probably a little bit more rest at points. I don't know if they're going to be able to hold on, and maybe if they can stay and play in contention, they want to be able to do that. But I think there's going to be caution because they're playing next year. They're going to be a real contender. Adding in Chet Holmgren and likely another lottery pick on top of what they already have, the ability to be able to make some big moves, to be able to fill in their rotation further. This team's going to be very good next season. I think they're going to be a playoff team next year, and to risk that if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is compromised does not make sense to push for the play-in. So, there's been a lot of talk of SGA gets shut down. I mean, he had legitimate injuries, and that narrative has been pushed onto the Thunder. But when he was hurt in previous years, he was actually hurt. The guy wants to play, and I think they are cautious because they're trying to avoid what we just saw with LaMelo Ball. That doesn't mean he's going to be shut down for the year, but I think if he's legitimately hurt, they're going to make sure that he's 100% before he's back out on the court.
All right. Moving on to a points league. Guys, should I drop MPJ or WCJ for Kelly Oubre in a 12-team points league? Matt, what do we think?
I think Oubre is going to be around a top 75 producer down the stretch here in points leagues. Wendell Carter Jr. has not been having the best run. MPJ's been a little bit inconsistent. That's a hard drop, but I do think we're going to be seeing a lot of Kelly Oubre because you can only ask Terry Rozier to do so much, and then there's really almost no one else unless you're actually getting Gordon Hayward to trot out there to be able to contribute anything scoring the basketball on that roster. So I think it's going to be kind of an all-you-can-eat situation for Oubre, which, high usage. That's a great formula for a points league. And I'm willing to invest in it to the extent that, MPJ and Wendell Carter are more categories players in some ways than they are points league players. And I think you could get a really nice run here from Oubre if you're pushing for a title.
And is Oubre somebody that you'd be targeting if you're making that final push, as you mentioned? Is that somebody you'd be trying to trade before the upcoming fantasy trade deadline?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in points formats, but even in categories, I think he's going to be a borderline top 100 player. So depending on your format and league size, if that's a fit for you, I think you're going to have a good run from him. I mean, we've seen this with him on bad teams. He can put up really big stats in ugly situations, and I expect more of that down the stretch for Charlotte.
All right. Is Rui an ad in a 16-team, 15-category league? That is quite the specific league. Yeah, I think he's definitely an ad in that type of format. That's a deep enough league that, you want to have somebody like him on your team, even with the recent additions from the Lakers.
I'd give him a chance. Obviously, depending on what those categories are. In a standard 9-cat, Rui's just not a great categories player, but he's going to have an additional run here because of the absence of LeBron James. So you want to see what that looks like in these early games. I think he's an add in deeper formats until we get a sense of what his actual role is going to be with LeBron out.
And comment underneath to clarify, playoffs don't start for 3 more weeks. Does that change your opinion here? For me, it does. I think look for better options in the meantime, and then maybe scoop them up here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that's right. And honestly, number one, get your league to not play fantasy in April next year.
Yeah.
And this goes out to everybody. Do not play fantasy basketball in April unless you want the Jalen Hordes and Drew Eubankses of the world to become fantasy superstars like they have in the last couple of years in April. It completely defeats the purpose of what we're doing here, which is trying to be able to assemble the strongest team throughout the bulk of the regular season to all of a sudden have that completely tossed out at the end as hordes of G League players invade NBA rosters in April for meaningless basketball. You might as well be playing preseason fantasy basketball. But yes, in this situation, you wait, you see what the outlook looks like, because in that much time, in 3 weeks, the entire landscape could change.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. Name dropping Jalen Horde. Yeah, fantasy darling. All right, some nostalgia. Do you suggest holding Josh Okogie in a 14-team league? I would suggest holding him in a 12-team league, to be honest with you. I think anytime a guy comes back from injury, Kevin Durant is supposed to make his debut in the Suns' next game. I think anytime a guy comes back from injury, you always want to hold somebody that has, placed him. I'm not sure Okogie has essentially replaced him, but he certainly filled in some voided minutes left behind from Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, and of course Durant not being there. But I think you absolutely have to hold him, and there's a chance that he remains in the starting 5 along with the other 4 that are locked in there in Ayton, Booker, Paul, and Kevin Durant. I think definitely you hold on to him.
Yeah, if he's not continues to knock down shots the way that he is, he's a good defensive player. They need that. They need that ballast of low usage, knocking down shots. He's going to have a lot of wide open threes available to him, and whoever can kind of best fit that role is going to get those minutes to just be that complementary role player with the Sun stars. And that could be Okogie. I think he's probably at least going to hold around top 150 value going forward, even if the minutes do drop a little bit with Kevin Durant back in the fold. But at least initially, it should be something similar to what we saw in recent weeks. The real question is just, is this the kind of shooter that he is now? Because he's been absolutely on fire for a long stretch now, long enough that I think it's a real sample that we can depend on. And I hope it does, because it's been great to be able to see a guy who really struggled a lot in Minnesota coming into his own and becoming a really solid NBA role player during the season.
All right. Yeah, love Josh Okogie. Hopefully he can continue to play well. All right. Friend of the show, Adam King. Morning, gents, all the way from Australia. Thank you, Adam. I'm sure you're sipping your tea and eating your Vegemite toast. How high do you have Wemby in Dynasty? Who would you have ahead of him in drafts for next season? I will toss this over to you, my friend. How high do you have him, and how high would you be drafting him?
All right. So uniquely suited to answer this, I think I'm one of the only people sick enough to have a dynasty ranking that actually includes all the 2023 NBA draft prospects that are coming in. You can find that on my Patreon page that's linked on my Twitter profile. But I'll give this one up for free. After looking closely at his stat set, and let me tell you guys, this thing is basically flawless for 9-category basketball. This is a guy who's leading the French league, a professional league, a solid professional league with grown adults. He is leading in scoring, and he's doing that by having an excellent perimeter game. On top of that, you get all the big man stats that make guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., pop all the way to the top of 9-cat rankings. So elite block rate, elite rebounder. The only real hole is that he's just not that great of a passer yet, but you can see that beginning to develop that ability. So those assists are probably going to come because he's going to have the ball in his hands. There could be no flaw in the 9-category stat set. So I say all that as a preamble to be able to say that I have him right now kind of preemptively slotted in at number 3 in Dynasty going forward. Number 3 only behind Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic, because I know what I have in those guys, and I know what I'm going to be getting for the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years from those players and how good they are and how good they can be going forward. But Wembanyama, the potential is sky high. This is a guy who, like Anthony Davis, could have multiple years where he's just the number 1 player in 9-cat fantasy year after year. And I get that the health is a question, but his team is doing such an excellent job of maintaining his body, worrying about his feet, which is always a huge concern for a big man. They're not going to put a lot of extra weight on him. He's going to be more of a perimeter player, but he's going to be a great off-ball defender in the sense that he's going to be able to rim protect coming from the weak side and swat everything. The things that he can block are absurd. You've never seen them on an NBA court before. So this is a guy who can easily average over 3 blocks in an NBA season, dominate that category for you, while also being an elite contributor in points, threes, rebounds, and have strong percentages. This guy is shooting 90+ free throw percentage over his last 15 games right now. So there's really no flaw here, and you really can't be high enough in Dynasty on someone like this because it is once in a generation.
Man, I think you're starting to break a sweat over there, man. That was so for everybody that's listening, tell us what is the gap as far as fantasy for Victor Wembanyama to Scoot Henderson? Because for me, Scoot is a guy that I look at and you watch his game, and in most other drafts, he's the top overall pick. He has the misfortune to be playing with the generational talent of Victor Wembanyama, but in many other drafts, this is a clear-cut number 1 guy, right? And I mean, so what's the difference here between Wembanyama and Scoot as far as fantasy goes? Is that a massive, craterous gap, or is this just something that's, a little bit?
Yeah, so this is actually going to be one of the bigger things that I'm going to be beating the drum on over the next few months, especially heading into Dynasty rookie drafts and the upcoming season. Scoot Henderson is an amazing prospect. And like you said, I mean, he would be number 1 in most NBA drafts. The issue is that his stat set, to me, is not as well suited for categories leagues as it is for points leagues. The stat set is extremely similar to what we have from Ja Morant, and people continue to be disappointed in what they get from categories leagues from Ja Morant. But this is going to be a guy who the field goal percentage will be fine. I think he's a good finisher, so you're going to get, not going to be killed in field goal percentage. He's going to score a bunch. The assists are going to be huge. So it's going to be very similar to Ja in that way, but he's not a confident 3-point shooter yet. Like Ja, the percentage is solid. It's good actually this year in the G League, but the volume is low. And maybe that develops and he becomes a really strong 3-point shooter. If he becomes Dame Lillard from 3, the potential is sky high, but we haven't seen that yet. And the issue is, you're going to have a good steal rate, but there's going to be nothing in blocks. The free throw percentage is not good. And that's going to be a big problem because this is a guy who is just a walking rim attempt. He can get to the bucket at will. He's going to get fouled a lot, and he's going to go strong to the rim. He's going to try to dunk on people the way that Ja Morant does, and he doesn't hit his free throws yet. And maybe that happens, but these early indicators, I mean, Ja Morant was a better free throw shooter in college than we're seeing from Scoot Henderson in the G League. So that's a real issue. And in categories leagues, it is going to hold him back unless he makes that development. And we'll see where that is. But for me, there's a clear difference between Wembanyama and Scoot in categories leagues. In points leagues, much closer. And I could easily see Scoot being a top 10 points league player throughout his career once he gets into his prime. And same for Wembanyama. But in categories, 9-cat especially, there is a gap there. And you want Victor Wembanyama on your team. You want Scoot too, but there's a gap.
All right, so we're nearing our 40 minutes here. If you have time, we'll go ahead and end this with just a couple of more trade questions centered around Victor Wembanyama, because I know that is he's a very hot player. I'm currently sitting on 1.2. I'm extremely guard heavy, 5 games out on Victor for the number 1 spot. Assuming I can't get there, do I move the pick for the 1.2? So this is kind of in the same vein as what you just discussed. 9 guards or shaky. The roster, Tobias, Vooch, Okongwu, Wiseman, John, Isaac, Tatum as my 9 guards of relevance. So based on that, 5 games out, sitting on the 1.2, which is going to be Scoot, I'm assuming, right? You have to go for Scoots, Vic 1, Scoot 2. What are you doing there? Are you moving that pick for whatever you can get if you miss out on Wemby, or what are you trying to do here?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a little bit context dependent, because obviously if I'm in a points league, I don't care about positional needs there. And I'm just focused on getting the best possible players. And I'm taking Scoot Henderson and I'm holding him. In a categories league, I'm only trading that pick if I'm getting a top 25 dynasty asset in return. Maybe even top 20. I think the hype on Scoot Henderson is going to have him going in the top 20 of dynasty startups this offseason. So I'm not moving Scoot in a situation unless I'm getting an elite return, and I'm not doing it until I get closer to the rookie draft, because everybody needs to understand the hype is only going to grow until we get to June. We're not even close to peak hype on these prospects. It's going to keep climbing up, and the value that you're going to be able to get for those top picks, the FOMO that people are going to have in your league to want to get one of those top 2 picks, is going to lead some insane trade returns down the stretch. So do not trade it now. We are not at peak market for them. You hold on to that asset, you watch it grow as there's no basketball on, as people are actually getting in tune to these prospects in this draft. When they want to make that big move, that's when you capitalize. When your draft has started, right before your draft has started, after the NBA draft, that's the point where you're going to get maximum value. Don't move it now. Don't worry about positional needs. Hold it and take Scoot if that's what comes up to you. And maybe you're just going to get that Godfather offer that you have to say yes to, but don't worry about it for right now.
All right. And one final question. This is one that somebody sent me a message on Twitter, and I thought this was fascinating. Somebody is being offered Chet Holmgren and Ben Mathurin for their lottery pick. The lottery has not gone on yet. The guy has a 30% chance of landing the number 1 spot, so a less than 1 in 3 shot. He's worried that it could turn into Wemby and he'll miss out, but then he's worried if it falls and he ends up as the 3rd or 4th pick, then he's going to miss out on Chet and Ben, and that would be a huge miss. So where do you go from here? Would you accept that offer? Or do you have any sort of advice for people that are looking at these sort of lottery picks that have, not yet been decided, and how to trade them?
Right. So a big part of the reason that I loved Chet Holmgren last year is that his projected 9-cat stat set, and it was confirmed by what we saw in Summer League this year, it's kind of like a light diet version of what we're going to get from Wembanyama. He's not that level of scorer. He doesn't have that ability in the half court, but it's in that same ballpark. And it's going to be really special for fantasy. I think Chet, at his peak, he can easily be a top 10 fantasy player in 9-cat, and also very strong one in points leagues, because he's going to bring such strong rebounds, which are such a cheat code in points formats. So when you have a guy can average over 10 rebounds per game. So I love this trade. It's going to hurt if that 30% hits, but it's only 30%. You're talking about a 70% outcome where you're regretting not taking this deal. So I think that there's probably some value in holding a little bit longer because I think that trade's still going to be there for you. Chet Holmgren isn't going to be playing between now and the NBA draft. His value is going to hold around the same. Benedict Matherin's value is going to hold around the same. You might be able to get even more. You might be able to parlay that into better offers with other people. So as good as that deal is in raw value, I think it's there. I've learned in the past that you want to hold on, not make that deal too early if you've got that strong lottery pick. If you think that it's going to grow in value, which I do, I might hold on a little bit longer, but I'm also okay with it accepting it if you are okay with the immense hurt that you're going to feel at that 30% hits.
All right, guys, I think that'll do it. There's a bunch of questions here in the chat we didn't get to, so obviously feel free to. I know Matt is active on Twitter. I'm active on Twitter. Feel free to shoot us questions. And I know Matt's good about getting back to them. I usually try to as well. Matt, thanks so much for jumping in here, man. This was a great discussion. I always love to hear your insight. I love following you on Twitter and the work that you're doing. Go ahead and give us a plug, man. What are you working on right now? Where can we find you?
All right. If you want to find what I'm doing, come on over on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP. On my profile page, you're going to get all of the information that you need to be able to find my content. You're going to go to FBIbasketball.com to be able to find Dynasty ADP, Dynasty rankings, and everything that's coming through that we put on our main website. It's also going to have the link to join our Discord community. We're going 2,300 people strong. There is fantasy discussion going on 24/7. You can find me there. I'm answering questions there. And you're going to have a whole lot of new league opportunities. If you're interested in joining a new Dynasty League, if you want to just explore the idea of it with us in our Dynasty chat, it's a great place to be able to get started. And then if you want to be able to see the work that I'm doing with my top 100 2023 NBA draft prospects, all the fantasy projections that I'm putting together for the 2023 NBA draft, that's all on my Patreon page, patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. You can find that link on my page as well. And over on Twitter, I'm doing daily Dynasty reports where you're getting information and analysis on young players every single day. That's something that I've been trying to do daily. So follow me if you want to be able to get a little bit more input on the trajectories of young players, daily analysis of what happened in the NBA the day before from the perspective of first, second, and third year players in the league. Zach, it has been an absolute pleasure being with you on this. I hope we get another chance to be able to do it sometime soon. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the great questions from you all.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And thanks again for jumping in, man. We definitely appreciate it. That'll do it for this week, guys. We will see you back here next Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and best of luck in your matchups. We'll see you.